The pencil moved across paper with such grace that Thomas Reardon forgot entirely why he had ridden down to the river that humid August afternoon in 1878. His dusty trail forgotten in favor of watching the woman's slender fingers capture the cottonwood trees in charcoal and lead. She sat on a flat rock near the water's edge, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a loose braid that had begun to unravel in the California heat, wisps of it clinging to her damp neck. Thomas had been riding the fence line of his ranch outside Angel's camp when he'd heard the soft scratch of pencil on paper carried on the breeze, and curiosity had drawn him down the slope toward the rushing waters of Angel's Creek. She hadn't noticed him yet, too absorbed in her work, and Thomas found himself reluctant to disturb her concentration. He dismounted quietly, looping his horse's reins around a low branch, and moved closer on foot. The woman wore a simple calico dress the color of summer wheat, practical rather than fashionable, with the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. Her boots were scuffed and well-worn, suggesting she wasn't one of the pampered ladies from the big houses in town. Something about the set of her shoulders, the intensity with which she studied the landscape before translating it to paper, made Thomas's breath catch in his chest. When he was close enough to see over her shoulder, he stopped entirely, transfixed by the skill evident in every stroke. The sketch showed the river in remarkable detail, each ripple and reflection rendered with an artist's eye. The surrounding trees seemed to sway on the page, so lifelike he could almost hear their leaves rustling. In the corner, she had drawn a pair of deer drinking at the water's edge, though Thomas saw no such animals now. Memory, perhaps, or imagination. "That is beautiful work," he said softly, not wanting to startle her too badly. She jumped anyway, the pencil skating across the page and leaving an unwanted line through the water's reflection. Her head whipped around, blue-gray eyes wide with surprise and a touch of alarm. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, and Thomas found himself noting details he had no business noticing. The scatter of freckles across her nose, the way her lips parted slightly as she caught her breath, the delicate curve of her jaw. "I apologize," he said quickly, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "I did not mean to disturb you. I heard the drawing sounds and my curiosity got the better of my manners." Her alarm faded, replaced by a mixture of annoyance and resignation as she looked down at the ruined section of her sketch. "It is fine," she said, though her tone suggested it was not entirely fine. "I should have expected company eventually. The creek is not exactly private land." "Actually, this section is part of my ranch," Thomas said, then immediately regretted it when her expression shifted to wariness. "But you are more than welcome here, of course. I did not mean to imply otherwise. I am Thomas Reardon. My land runs from here up to the ridge." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his worn work clothes, the honest dirt on his boots, the calluses visible on his hands. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "Sophia Jensen. I am staying with my aunt in town while I recover from pneumonia. The doctor suggested fresh air and sunshine, so I have been walking out here most afternoons. Well, Miss Jensen, I hope the air and sunshine are doing their job." Thomas gestured toward the sketchbook. "May I see more of your work, or would that be presumptuous?" Sophia hesitated, her fingers tightening protectively on the book's edges. Thomas had started to withdraw the request when she surprised him by turning back a few pages. The sketches revealed a keen eye and steady hand. A mockingbird perched on a fence post, its every feather distinct, an old miner leading a laden mule up a mountain path, the main street of Angel's Camp with its false-fronted buildings and wooden sidewalks. "These are remarkable," Thomas said, and meant it. "Have you been drawing long, since I was a child?" My father was a photographer in San Francisco before he died. He taught me to really see things, to notice light and shadow and composition. A sadness crossed her face, brief but unmistakable. He has been gone 3 years now. The pneumonia took my mother this past winter, which is why I am here with Aunt Dorothy. I had nowhere else to go. The raw honesty of her admission caught Thomas off guard. Most people, especially women he barely knew, kept such painful truths tucked away behind polite conversation. "I am sorry for your losses," he said quietly. "Both of my parents are gone as well. My father built this ranch from nothing, and now it falls to me to keep it running." "Are you managing it alone?" "I have 2 ranch hands, Miguel and his son Carlos. Good men, hard workers, but yes, essentially alone. My sister married a banker in Sacramento and has no interest in ranch life." He smiled slightly. "She thinks I am crazy for staying out here when I could sell the land and live comfortably in the city." "Why do you stay?" Sophia asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Thomas looked out over the creek, watching the water tumble over smooth stones, the sunlight dancing on its surface. "Because this place is in my blood. Because I wake up every morning to mountains and open sky instead of crowded streets and coal smoke. Because the work I do here matters, produces something real and tangible." He met her eyes again. "Because I cannot imagine being anywhere else." She nodded slowly, as if his answer made perfect sense. "I understand that. San Francisco was home because my parents were there, but after they died, the city felt hollow. Every street corner held a memory I was not ready to face. Coming here has been difficult in its own way, but at least the grief is not quite so suffocating." They fell into a comfortable silence, the rush of water filling the space between words. Thomas found himself wanting to prolong this unexpected encounter, to learn more about this woman who sketched by his river and spoke so plainly about loss and longing. "I have a strange question," he said suddenly, the idea forming even as he spoke it. "Would you be willing to draw something for me? I would pay you, of course." Sophia's eyebrows rose. "What sort of something?" Thomas felt heat creep up his neck, suddenly aware of how foolish the impulse might sound, but he pressed forward anyway. "Our future. Yours and mine." She stared at him as if he had sprouted a second head. "Mr. Reardon, we have only just met. I do not understand what you mean." "I know how it sounds," Thomas said quickly. "But standing here talking with you, I feel something I have not felt in a long time, a connection, a spark of possibility. And I know you are a practical woman who has survived great loss, so you understand how short and uncertain life can be. What I am asking is this: would you be willing to spend time with me, to see if this feeling might grow into something real? And would you be willing to draw what you imagine that future might look like, if we are both brave enough to reach for it?" Sophia's lips parted in surprise, and for a terrible moment, Thomas was certain she would gather her things and flee, or worse, laugh at his presumption. But instead, something shifted in her expression, a glimmer of something that might have been hope or intrigue or simple curiosity. "That is the strangest proposal I have ever heard," she said slowly, "and possibly the most honest." "I have never been good at games or pretense," Thomas admitted. "Life on a ranch does not leave much room for it. You speak plainly, and I appreciate that. So I am speaking plainly too. I would like to know you better, Sophia Jensen. And if you are not interested, tell me so, and I will tip my hat and leave you to your sketching in peace." She looked down at her sketchbook, her fingers tracing the edge of the ruined drawing. When she looked up again, there was a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I think I would like to know you better too, Thomas Reardon, though I warn you, I am not easy company. I am stubborn and opinionated, and I have strong feelings about a great many things." "Good," Thomas said, his own smile breaking free. "I would not know what to do with someone meek and agreeable. My ranch foreman's wife is the most stubborn woman in Calaveras County, and she has taught me that strength of character is worth far more than empty compliance." "When would you like me to start this future drawing?" Sophia asked, her tone lighter now, almost teasing. "How about you spend some time getting to know me first, and then when you have a sense of whether you can tolerate my company, you can put pencil to paper." Thomas settled onto a rock near hers, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Tell me about San Francisco." "I have only been there twice, and both times I felt like a fish out of water." So Sophia told him about growing up in the city, about her father's photography studio, where she had spent countless hours mixing chemicals and posing subjects, learning to see the world through a lens. She spoke of her mother's small garden, an oasis of green in their tiny yard, and how her mother had grown vegetables and herbs that seemed impossible in the urban environment. Thomas listened, genuinely interested, asking questions that showed he was paying attention to details. In turn, he told her about the ranch, about the seasons of planting and harvest, about the cattle drives and the challenges of managing land in drought and flood. He spoke of his father's dream of building something lasting, a legacy that would endure beyond one man's lifetime. He described the view from the ridge at sunset, the way the whole valley seemed to glow gold and amber as the day faded. The afternoon stretched long around them, the shadows shifting as the sun moved westward. Neither seemed in a hurry to leave, finding in each other an unexpected ease of conversation. They discovered shared opinions on books they had both read, laughed over similar experiences with stubborn livestock, and debated the future of California now that the railroad had transformed the state. "I should be getting back," Sophia finally said with obvious reluctance, glancing at the sun's position. "Aunt Dorothy will worry if I am gone too long. She is convinced I will collapse in the wilderness somewhere and never be found." "May I ride back with you?" Thomas offered. "Or would that cause talk? Angel's Camp is already talking about the mysterious artist staying with Dorothy Marshall," Sophia said wryly. "A little more gossip will hardly matter, but yes, you may ride with me, though I warn you I am walking, not riding. Then I will walk my horse alongside you." Thomas stood and offered his hand to help her up from the rock. When her fingers touched his, he felt that spark again, stronger now, a current of connection that made his pulse quicken. They made their way back toward town at an easy pace, Thomas leading his horse while Sophia carried her sketchbook and pencil case. They continued talking, the conversation flowing as naturally as the creek they left behind. By the time they reached the edge of Angel's Camp, where the scattered buildings began to cluster more tightly together, Thomas knew with absolute certainty that his impulsive request had not been foolish at all. This woman, with her artist's eyes and frank manner, had already begun to work her way into his thoughts and heart. "This is far enough," Sophia said, stopping at the corner where Main Street began. "Aunt Dorothy's house is just 2 blocks down. Thank you for the company, Mr. Reardon." "Thomas," he corrected gently. "Please." "Thomas," she repeated, testing the name on her lips, "and you must call me Sophia. May I see you again, tomorrow, perhaps at the creek?" She smiled, and Thomas thought it was the loveliest sight he had seen in months. "Tomorrow, same time. And perhaps I will begin thinking about that future drawing you requested." He watched her walk away, noting the straight line of her back, the confident stride despite her recent illness. Several townspeople passed by, eyeing Thomas with curiosity, but he hardly noticed. His mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow, to the next conversation, to the possibility blooming between them like wildflowers after rain. The next afternoon found Thomas finishing his work with uncharacteristic haste, earning knowing looks from Miguel and Carlos. He changed into clean clothes, attempted to tame his son's streaked brown hair with water from the pump, and saddled his horse with hands that trembled slightly with anticipation. Sophia was already at the creek when he arrived, seated on the same flat rock, but this time she was not drawing. Instead, she had a book open on her lap and seemed lost in its pages. She looked up as he approached, her face brightening in a way that made his heart kick against his ribs. "You came," she said, as if there had been any doubt. "Did you think I would not?" "I wondered if perhaps daylight and sober reflection might have changed your mind about the strange woman by the creek." She closed her book and set it aside. Thomas sat down beside her, closer than yesterday but still respectfully distant. "Not strange. Remarkable. There is a difference. You are very sure of yourself for a rancher who spends most of his time with cattle." "I am sure of very few things in this life," Thomas said honestly. "But I am sure that meeting you was not an accident, and I am sure that I want to know where this leads." They spent that afternoon much like the first, talking and sharing stories, but with a deeper ease born of the previous day's foundation. Sophia told him about her dreams of perhaps opening a small photography studio in Angel's Camp, carrying on her father's work in her own way. Thomas spoke of his hope to expand the ranch, to build something that could support multiple families and become a real community. "You think big," Sophia observed. "Most men would be content with what they have." Most men did not grow up hearing their father talk about legacy and purpose until the words became part of their bones, Thomas replied. He believed that work should mean something beyond survival, that we should leave the world better than we found it. My father believed something similar about art. He said that photographs could capture truth in a way words sometimes could not, could preserve moments and memories that would otherwise be lost to time. Sophia's expression grew distant. "I have his camera, but I have not been able to bring myself to use it since he died. It feels too sacred somehow, too weighted with memory." "Perhaps someday you will be ready," Thomas said gently. "And when you are, I would be honored to be your first subject." She smiled at that, a sad but grateful smile. Perhaps. They continued meeting at the creek every afternoon for the next week. Thomas found excuses to finish his work early, and Sophia found reasons to extend her walks. They talked about everything and nothing, building the kind of familiarity that usually took months or years. Thomas learned that Sophia had a sharp wit and a tendency to challenge conventional wisdom, that she had opinions on everything from literature to politics to the proper way to brew coffee. Sophia discovered that Thomas had a quiet strength and a thoughtful nature, that he listened more than he spoke, and considered his words carefully before offering them. On the 8th day, Sophia brought her sketchbook with deliberate intent. "I have been thinking about your request," she said without preamble. "The future drawing." Thomas's pulse quickened. "And I want to try, but I need you to understand that what I draw might not come to pass. The future is uncertain, and I will not hold you to anything I put on paper." "I understand. Show me what you see." Sophia opened to a fresh page and began to sketch with quick, confident strokes. Thomas watched in fascination as the image took shape. A ranch house, larger than his current home, with a wide porch and flower boxes beneath the windows. In the foreground, she drew two figures standing close together, a man and a woman, his arm around her shoulders. In the distance, she added cattle grazing on rolling hills, and off to one side, a small building with a sign that read Jensen Photography. "There," she said, her voice uncertain for the first time since he had known her. "Our future, if we choose it." Thomas stared at the drawing, emotion tightening his throat. She had captured something he had not quite articulated even to himself, the dream of sharing his life and work with someone, of building not just a ranch but a home. "It is perfect," he managed. "Exactly right. You are sure? It is presumptuous of me to include my own dreams in your future." He turned to face her fully, taking her free hand in both of his. "Sophia, I asked you to draw our future. Not mine, ours. Your dreams belong there just as much as mine do. More, perhaps, because without you in it, that future is just a collection of buildings and livestock. With you, it becomes something worth having." Her eyes widened, and he saw the shimmer of tears she was too proud to let fall. "Thomas Reardon, I have known you barely more than a week. This is madness." "Then let us be mad together. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am only asking you to consider the possibility, to keep meeting me here, to let this feeling between us grow into something neither of us can deny. And if I consider it, if I admit that I feel this too, this impossible pull toward you, what then? Then we take it one day at a time. You keep drawing, I keep ranching. We keep talking and learning each other until we are both certain this is real and lasting." Sophia looked down at the sketch, at the future she had rendered in charcoal and hope. When she looked back at Thomas, there was determination in her expression. "I will not be a conventional ranch wife. I will want my photography studio. I will want to keep drawing and perhaps selling my artwork. I will want a voice in decisions about the ranch. I would expect nothing less. I do not want a conventional wife. I want a partner. Someone who challenges me and inspires me and builds beside me." "Then yes," she said softly. "Let us see where this madness leads." Thomas leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Sophia met him halfway, her lips soft against his in a kiss that felt like both a beginning and a homecoming. When they parted, both were trembling slightly, overwhelmed by the force of what they had acknowledged. "I should tell you," Sophia said, her voice unsteady, "that Aunt Dorothy will require a proper courtship. She is old-fashioned and believes in doing things correctly. Then I will court you correctly. I will call on you at her home with flowers and good manners. I will take you to church socials and town events. I will prove to her and to all of Angel's Camp that my intentions are honorable. Even though we both know this is already decided," Thomas smiled. "Even though, sometimes the ceremony matters as much as the substance." They spent another hour by the creek, sitting close together now, hands intertwined, talking about practical matters like timelines and expectations. Sophia explained that her health had improved considerably, but that the doctor wanted her to remain in Angel's Camp through the autumn at least. Thomas suggested that would give them time to court properly, to let their relationship develop in full view of the community, so that no one could question its legitimacy. When they finally parted that evening, it was with the understanding that everything had changed. Tomorrow, Thomas would call on Dorothy Marshall and formally request permission to court her niece. Sophia would prepare her aunt for the visit, smoothing the way as much as possible. True to his word, Thomas presented himself at Dorothy Marshall's front door the next afternoon, freshly shaved and wearing his best clothes, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers he had gathered that morning. Dorothy was a formidable woman in her 50s, rail, thin and sharp-eyed, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked Thomas up and down with obvious skepticism. "Mr. Reardon, Sophia said you would be calling. Come in." The parlor was neat and spare, furnished with pieces that had seen better days but were meticulously maintained. Sophia sat on a horsehair sofa, wearing a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She smiled at Thomas but remained properly demure as her aunt settled into a straight-backed chair and fixed him with a penetrating stare. "So," Dorothy began without preamble, "you wish to court my niece. "Yes, madam, I do." "Why?" The bluntness of the question caught Thomas off guard, but he recovered quickly. "Because in the short time I have known her, Sophia has shown herself to be intelligent, talented, and strong-minded. Because I believe we share similar values and compatible dreams for the future. Because when I am with her, I feel more myself than I have felt in years." Dorothy's expression did not soften. "Sophia has been through considerable hardship. She does not need a rancher's empty promises adding to her troubles." "I make no empty promises, Mrs. Marshall. I offer only honest intentions and a willingness to prove myself worthy of her trust. Words are easy, Mr. Reardon. Actions require commitment. Then I will commit to actions. You may set whatever conditions you deem appropriate for our courtship. I will meet them." Dorothy studied him for a long moment, then glanced at Sophia, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed amusement. "You have chosen a difficult man, niece, stubborn and sure of himself." "I am stubborn and sure of myself as well, aunt. Perhaps that is why we suit each other." A ghost of a smile flickered across Dorothy's stern face. "Very well, Mr. Reardon. You may court Sophia under the following conditions. You will call here at the house, not meet secretly by the creek. You will attend church with us on Sundays. You will be transparent about your financial situation and prospects. And you will conduct yourself as a gentleman at all times, with appropriate chaperones present during your visits." "I agree to all of those terms," Thomas said immediately. "Good. Then you may stay for supper this evening. I wish to get to know you better, and there is no better way to judge a man's character than to see how he conducts himself at table." The supper was simple but well prepared. Roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and greens from Dorothy's garden. Thomas found himself subjected to a rigorous interview disguised as polite conversation, with Dorothy asking pointed questions about his education, his business practices, his views on women's roles and family responsibilities. He answered honestly, aware that Sophia was listening carefully to every word, her own evaluation running parallel to her aunt's. By the time the meal ended, some of the ice in Dorothy's manner had thawed. "You may call again on Thursday evening," she pronounced. "Sophia and I have sewing circle on Tuesday afternoons, and I will not have her routine disrupted entirely by courtship. Thursday it is. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Marshall." Thomas stood and turned to Sophia. "And thank you for a lovely evening." "I will walk you to the door," Sophia said, rising as well. In the brief moment of relative privacy in the front hallway, Sophia caught his hand and squeezed it quickly. "You handled that admirably. Aunt Dorothy is impressed, though she would never admit it." "I meant every word I said." "To her and to you. I know you did. That is why this is going to work." She released his hand as they heard Dorothy moving in the parlor. "Thursday, then. Thursday, and Sunday at church." Thomas left feeling more optimistic than he had in months. The courtship would be formal and properly conducted, but beneath the surface, he and Sophia both knew they were building towards something significant and lasting. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Thomas called on Sophia twice a week at Dorothy's house, where they sat in the parlor and talked while Dorothy worked on her needlepoint nearby, a silent but vigilant chaperone. On Sundays, Thomas attended the small Methodist church with the Marshall women, enduring the curious stares and whispered speculation of the other congregants. After services, he would walk Sophia around the town square, discussing the sermon or commenting on the changing season as autumn began to paint the hillsides in shades of gold and rust. On the days when formal visiting was not permitted, Thomas sometimes encountered Sophia accidentally on her afternoon walks, though they were careful to keep these meetings brief and circumspect. Dorothy had eyes and ears throughout Angel's camp, and neither wanted to jeopardize the fragile approval they had earned. During this time, Thomas learned more about Sophia's past and character. He discovered that she volunteered at the small lending library on Wednesday mornings, helping organize books and teaching children to read. He learned that she had a temper when roused, particularly on matters of injustice or cruelty. He watched her sketch the town and its inhabitants with an artist's compassion, capturing not just their features but something of their essential nature. Sophia, in turn, learned that Thomas was respected in the community, despite being somewhat solitary by nature. She met Miguel and his son Carlos when Thomas invited her to tour the ranch one Sunday afternoon with Dorothy as chaperone. Miguel's wife, Rosa, welcomed them warmly, and Sophia was charmed by the family's obvious affection for Thomas and their pride in the work they did together. "He is a good man," Rosa told Sophia quietly while the men discussed fence repairs. "Fair and honest. He paid for the doctor when Carlos broke his arm last year, never asked for the money back. He treats us like partners, not hired help." This endorsement meant more to Sophia than any flowery courtship gesture could have. She had grown up watching her father treat his employees with respect and dignity, and she knew that a man's character could be measured by how he treated those with less power than himself. 6 weeks into their courtship, Thomas invited Sophia and Dorothy to Sunday dinner at the ranch. Rosa helped prepare a feast, and they ate at the long table in Thomas's dining room, the conversation flowing easily between courses. After the meal, Thomas gave them a proper tour of the property, pointing out the improvements he had made and sharing his plans for future development. "This is where I envision building a larger barn," he explained, gesturing to a level stretch of land. "And over there, I would like to construct housing for additional ranch hands and their families, not just bunkhouses, but real homes with gardens and privacy." "You think of people first and profit second," Sophia observed. "That is unusual in ranching. Profit comes from people doing good work, and people do good work when they are treated well and given reason to care about more than just their wages," Thomas replied. "My father taught me that." Dorothy, who had been largely quiet during the tour, spoke up. "Your father was wise. Too many men of business forget that their workers are human beings with families and needs." As the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose, Thomas led them to the ridge he had mentioned during their first conversation. The view was everything he had promised. The valley spread below them, the creek a silver ribbon winding through cottonwoods, the mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. "This is where I come to think," Thomas admitted. "Where I come when I need to remember why I do this work." Sophia stood beside him, her eyes sweeping across the landscape with an artist's appreciation. "It is breathtaking. I can see why you could never leave this place. Would you want me to? If you were to marry me, would you expect to live somewhere else?" The question hung in the air between them, bold despite its hypothetical phrasing. Dorothy, standing a discreet distance away, pretended not to hear. "No," Sophia said simply. "I have grown to love this valley as well, and your plans for the ranch align with my own dreams. There is room here for both of us to build the lives we want. Then you have thought about it, about marrying me." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "I have thought about little else, if I am honest. But Thomas, we must be realistic. I am still recovering my strength. Winter is coming, and the doctor has said I should not face another hard winter too soon. I need more time to heal fully. I would wait as long as necessary. Years, if that is what you need." "Not years," she said with a slight smile, "but perhaps until spring. That would give us nearly 6 months of courtship, time to be absolutely certain this is what we both want." I am already certain, but I understand the wisdom of waiting. Spring it is, then. They stood together on the ridge as the sunset faded to twilight, making quiet plans for a future that seemed more real with each passing day. Dorothy watched them with an expression that might have been approval or simple resignation to the inevitable, but either way, she made no objection when they stood close together, shoulders touching, watching the first stars emerge in the darkening sky. As autumn deepened into winter, the courtship continued its steady progression. Thomas became a regular fixture at Dorothy's house and at church, and the town's initial gossip faded into acceptance. Sophia's health continued to improve, her cheeks gaining color and her stamina increasing. She began to use her father's camera, setting up a small darkroom in Dorothy's shed to develop the glass plates. Her first subjects were landscapes and buildings, but gradually she began photographing people. Miners and merchants, children and elderly couples, capturing the character of Angel's Camp and its inhabitants. Thomas commissioned her to photograph the ranch, wanting a record of how it looked now so he could compare it to the future they were building. Sophia spent several days capturing images of the buildings, the livestock, the people who worked the land. When she developed the photographs, Thomas was awed by her ability to make the familiar seem noble and significant. "You have a gift," he told her, studying the prints she had made. "These are not just pictures, they are art." "They are both," she replied. "That is what my father taught me. Art and documentation need not be separate things." In December, Thomas asked Dorothy for permission to give Sophia a Christmas gift. After some negotiation about appropriateness, Dorothy agreed that a book would be acceptable. Thomas chose a leather-bound volume of poetry by Walt Whitman, knowing Sophia admired the poet's bold vision of America. When she opened it on Christmas morning, after they had attended services together, her eyes filled with tears. "How did you know?" she asked softly, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "You quoted Song of Myself when we were discussing California's future. I noticed. I notice everything about you, Sophia. Then you will have noticed that I have been carrying something around for the past week, waiting for the right moment to give it to you." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small wrapped package. "Merry Christmas, Thomas." Inside was a framed photograph. The image from her future drawing, the ranch house with the couple standing together, but this time rendered in the stark beauty of black and white photography. She had somehow staged it, perhaps using stand-ins or careful composition, to create a photograph of a future that did not yet exist. "I do not have the words," Thomas said, his throat tight with emotion. "This is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received." "It is a promise," Sophia said quietly, aware of Dorothy's presence but no longer caring who heard. "A promise that I mean to keep. As do I." They spent Christmas afternoon at the ranch, sharing a meal with Miguel's family and enjoying the warmth of companionship and shared purpose. Thomas gave gifts to Rosa and the children, practical things they needed, and was rewarded with their genuine appreciation. Sophia watched these interactions, filing away further evidence of the man's character, adding to the catalog of reasons why she loved him. She had not said the words aloud yet, nor had he, but love was implicit in every conversation, every glance, every careful touch of hand to hand. They were both waiting for the right moment, the perfect time to make the declaration that would change everything. That moment came in late January, during an unseasonably warm afternoon that felt like a preview of spring. Sophia had been walking by the creek, ostensibly for exercise but actually hoping to encounter Thomas, who had become adept at finding excuses to ride the fence line near where they had first met. When she saw him approach, she smiled and waved, and he dismounted to walk beside her. "I have been thinking," Thomas said without preamble, "about our plans to marry in the spring." "Having second thoughts?" Sophia asked, though her tone was light and unworried. "Not about marrying you, never about that, but I have been thinking that perhaps we should set a specific date. Make it real and official. What did you have in mind? The first Sunday in May. That will give us time to plan properly, for you to prepare whatever you need, for me to finish the work on the house." "You are working on the house?" Thomas looked slightly abashed. "I have been adding rooms. Making it larger, more suitable for a family. I wanted to surprise you, but I suppose that is ruined now." "Not ruined. Wonderful." Sophia stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Thomas Reardon, I love you. I should have said it before now, but I was afraid of being too forward, too eager. But life is uncertain, and I will not waste another day without telling you the truth of my heart." His face transformed with joy, all his usual reserve melting away. "Sophia Jensen, I have loved you since I found you sketching by this creek. I love your talent and your stubbornness and your kind heart. I love the way you see the world and the way you make me want to be better than I am. I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of that love." They came together in an embrace that was both tender and passionate, a promise of the intimacy and partnership that awaited them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and grinning like children. "The first Sunday in May," Sophia confirmed. "I will marry you then, and we will begin the future we have been planning." "And drawing," Thomas added with a smile, "and drawing." The next few months passed in a flurry of preparation. Sophia worked with Dorothy and Rosa to plan a simple but meaningful wedding ceremony. She sewed her own dress, a practical but lovely creation in cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Thomas threw himself into completing the additions to the ranch house, working alongside Miguel and Carlos to ensure everything was finished by the deadline he had set. In early April, Sophia received a letter from her sister Beatrice in San Francisco, whom she had not seen since their mother's funeral. Beatrice wrote that she would be coming to Angel's Camp for the wedding, bringing her husband and 2 small children. The news delighted Sophia, who had feared that her only family at the ceremony would be Aunt Dorothy. "You will like Beatrice," Sophia told Thomas. "She is practical and sensible, nothing like me." "Then we will be nothing alike," Thomas replied with a smile, "and that is perfectly fine." When Beatrice arrived in late April, she proved to be indeed quite different from her sister. Taller, darker-haired, with a no-nonsense manner and a tendency toward bluntness that reminded Thomas of Dorothy. But she clearly adored Sophia, and after meeting Thomas, she gave her approval with characteristic directness. "You have chosen well," she told Sophia. "He is honest and hardworking, and he looks at you like you hung the moon. That is all anyone can ask for in a marriage." The wedding took place on the first Sunday in May 1879, exactly as planned. The small Methodist church was filled with townspeople and neighbors, all curious to witness the union of the artist and the rancher who had captivated local gossip for months. Sophia wore her handmade dress and carried wildflowers gathered that morning from the ranch. Thomas wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed to perfection, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished to a shine. The ceremony was simple and traditional, with the aging minister speaking of commitment and partnership, love and faithfulness. When the time came to exchange vows, Thomas's voice rang clear and certain through the small church, and Sophia's answering promise was equally firm. They exchanged simple gold bands that Thomas had ordered from Sacramento, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was both chaste and charged with promise. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by neighbors and friends. Rosa had outdone herself with the cooking, and Dorothy had organized everything with military precision. There was music from a fiddle player and his son on guitar, and dancing as the afternoon wore into evening. Sophia danced with Thomas, with Miguel, with her new brother-in-law, and even with old Mr. Peterson from the general store. Thomas danced with Rosa and Dorothy and Beatrice, receiving advice and warnings and congratulations in equal measure. Through it all, he kept returning to Sophia, drawn to her like a compass to true north. As the sun began to set, Thomas and Sophia slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to the ridge that had become their special place. Below them, the party continued, but here they had a moment of privacy and peace. "We did it," Sophia said, leaning into his embrace. "We are married. We are indeed Mrs. Reardon. How does it feel?" "Right. Perfect. Like everything in my life has been leading to this moment." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "I was lost after my parents died, adrift and purposeless, but you gave me direction again, hope, a future worth wanting. You gave me those things as well. I was going through the motions of living, working the ranch because it was expected, not because I truly cared. You reminded me why it all matters. You make everything matter." They kissed as the sun sank below the mountains, sealing their promises with tenderness and passion. When they finally returned to the party, hand in hand and glowing with happiness, they were greeted with cheers and good-natured teasing. The guests gradually departed as night fell, until only family and the closest friends remained. Dorothy embraced Sophia with rare emotion, whispering something in her ear that made Sophia tear up and nod. Beatrice hugged them both, promising to visit again soon. Miguel and Rosa offered their congratulations and best wishes before herding their children toward their own home. Finally, Thomas and Sophia were alone in the house that was now truly theirs. Thomas had carried her over the threshold to much laughter, and now they stood in the enlarged front room, taking in the new furniture and curtains that Rosa and Dorothy had arranged as a surprise. "Welcome home," Thomas said softly. "Home," Sophia repeated, testing the word. "Yes, this is home now. Our home." They spent their wedding night learning each other with patience and care, building intimacy that went beyond the physical to encompass emotional and spiritual connection. In the morning, they woke tangled together in the large bed that Thomas had built with his own hands, sunlight streaming through the window, and the sounds of the ranch waking up around them. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Sophia had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and the physical labor required to maintain the property. Thomas had to learn to share his space and his decisions, to consult rather than simply acting. There were disagreements and frustrations, moments when they had to consciously choose patience and understanding over irritation. But there was also joy and discovery. Sophia threw herself into setting up her photography studio in the small building Thomas had constructed for that purpose, exactly where she had drawn it in her future sketch. She began taking commissions from townspeople who wanted portraits, and word of her skill spread throughout Calaveras County. Thomas supported her work completely, sometimes serving as her assistant when she needed help with equipment or setup. In turn, Sophia became genuinely involved in the ranch operations. She had a head for numbers and took over the account books, discovering several ways to improve efficiency and reduce waste. She suggested crop rotations that increased yield and proposed a cooperative arrangement with neighboring ranches that benefited everyone involved. Thomas was proud of her contributions and made sure Miguel and the others knew that she was a full partner in the enterprise. By the end of their first summer together, the ranch was thriving in ways it never had before. The cattle were healthy and multiplying, the crops were abundant, and Thomas had hired 2 additional hands to help with the expanded operations. Sophia's photography business was growing steadily, and she had begun teaching basic photography to interested students on Saturday mornings. In September, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas the news while they were having supper, the 2 of them alone at the table as had become their custom. He stared at her for a long moment, the information sinking in, and then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen. "We are going to be parents?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "We are. Sometime in late March or early April if the doctor's calculations are correct." Thomas came around the table and pulled her gently to her feet, holding her as if she were made of glass. "This is the best news. The absolute best. Are you well? What do you need? Should you be resting more?" Sophia laughed at his sudden concern. "I am perfectly well, and I do not need to be wrapped in cotton wool. The doctor said I should continue my normal activities for as long as I am comfortable. I am strong now, Thomas. Stronger than I have ever been. Still, I will worry. That is my job now, worrying about both of you. Then worry if you must, but do not hover. I have work to do, photographs to take, a life to live. This baby will be born into a household that is active and engaged, not one where the mother was treated like an invalid." Thomas agreed, though he could not help but be more solicitous in the months that followed. He insisted on hiring additional help for the heavy work, and made sure Sophia always had what she needed. For her part, Sophia continued her photography as long as she physically could, documenting her own pregnancy in a series of self-portraits that would later be recognized as pioneering work in the field. Through the autumn and into the winter, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Rosa helped Sophia sew tiny clothes and blankets, sharing wisdom from her own experiences. Dorothy visited regularly, bringing supplies and advice. Beatrice wrote long letters full of encouragement and practical suggestions. Thomas converted one of the new rooms into a nursery, building a cradle with the same care he had put into their bed. Sophia painted the walls a soft yellow and hung curtains she had embroidered with small birds and flowers. Together they would sit in the room in the evenings, Thomas reading aloud while Sophia sewed, both of them imagining the child who would soon fill this space with noise and life. On a chilly morning in early April 1880, Sophia went into labor. Rosa came immediately when Thomas rode frantically to fetch her, bringing her calm competence and steady hands. The doctor arrived shortly after, and Thomas was banished to the front room where he paced and worried for the next several hours. When he finally heard the thin, demanding cry of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. Rosa emerged a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced, "and Sophia is well. Tired, but well. You may come see them now." Thomas entered the bedroom on shaking legs to find Sophia propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in the blue blanket Dorothy had knitted. She looked up as he approached, her eyes shining with tears and triumph. "Meet your son," she said softly. Thomas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face, red and scrunched and perfect. "He is beautiful. You are both beautiful. I have never seen anything more magnificent. What shall we name him? We never quite decided." They had discussed names endlessly over the winter, but had not committed to anything final, superstitious about choosing before the baby arrived safely. Now, looking at his son, Thomas knew exactly what felt right. "Jonathan," he said. "After your father, Jonathan William Reardon." Sophia's tears spilled over at the gesture. "You are certain? I thought you might want to name him after your father. "We will save that for the next one," Thomas said with a smile. "This one should be Jonathan, to honor the man who gave you your talent and your values. The man who helped make you the woman I love." "Jonathan William Reardon," Sophia repeated, looking down at their son. "Yes, that is exactly right." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, filled with sleepless nights and constant demands. But they were also suffused with joy and wonder as Thomas and Sophia discovered parenthood together. Thomas proved to be a devoted father, willing to walk the floor at midnight when Jonathan fussed, eager to help with feeding and changing and all the mundane tasks of infant care. Sophia recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning as Jonathan grew from a fragile newborn into a robust baby. By summer, she was back in her studio part-time, with Rosa watching Jonathan when Sophia had appointments. She discovered she could work from home for many projects, developing photographs while the baby napped, and that motherhood had not diminished her artistic vision, but rather enhanced it with new perspectives on love and family. As Jonathan grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Thomas had established the cooperative he and Sophia had planned, and several neighboring ranchers now worked together on cattle drives and shared resources for mutual benefit. The additional housing Thomas had built was occupied by 2 more families, and the ranch had become the thriving community he had envisioned. Sophia's photography studio had evolved into a significant business, with people coming from surrounding counties for her portraits. She had also begun documenting the changing landscape of California, creating a visual record of the transition from frontier to settled civilization. Her work was exhibited in Sacramento and San Francisco, earning critical praise and financial success. When Jonathan was 2 years old, Sophia discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was less anxiety and more joyful anticipation, confidence born of experience. In the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Claire Elizabeth, after Thomas's mother. Claire was a placid, happy baby who seemed to fit seamlessly into their busy household. The years flowed into one another, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. A drought tested the ranch's resources in 1883, but the cooperative structure and careful management saw them through. Sophia won recognition from the California Photographic Society in 1884 for her documentary work. Jonathan started school in Angels Camp in 1885, proving to be bright and curious like his mother. In 1886, Sophia gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Matthew, who brought chaos and laughter to the household in equal measure. Thomas built another addition to the house, and they hired a young woman from town to help with childcare and household tasks. The ranch employed 8 families now, and the community Thomas had dreamed of was fully realized. Through it all, Thomas and Sophia's love deepened and matured. The initial passion had not faded, but had been tempered and strengthened by shared experience, by the countless small decisions and compromises that constitute a life together. They still walked to the ridge on Sunday evenings when weather permitted, still talked for hours about dreams and plans, still found joy in each other's company. On their 10th wedding anniversary in May 1889, Thomas surprised Sophia with a gift that left her speechless. He had commissioned an artist in Sacramento to create an oil painting based on her original future drawing. The painting was large and exquisitely detailed, showing the ranch exactly as it now existed, with the house and photography studio and all the additions they had made over the years. But the figures in the foreground were different from her original sketch. Now there were 6 of them, 2 adults and 4 children, a complete family standing together on the land they had built. It is our future as it actually became, Thomas explained. I thought it should be preserved, to remind us of how far we have come from that day by the creek. Sophia traced the painted figures with one finger, her throat too tight for words. Jonathan and Claire and the twins, all rendered in oils, standing with their parents before the home they had created together. It is perfect, she finally managed, better than I ever imagined it could be. You imagined us together, Thomas said, pulling her close. That was the foundation. Everything else we built from that. They hung the painting in the front room where everyone could see it, a testament to the power of hope and vision, and the courage to pursue what seemed impossible. Visitors often commented on it, and Sophia would tell the story of how Thomas had found her sketching by the creek and asked her to draw their future. And did it come true? People would ask. Better than true, Sophia would reply, smiling at Thomas across the room. It became real. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Jonathan inherited his mother's artistic eye, but applied it to architecture, dreaming of designing buildings that would transform California's growing cities. Claire was fascinated by the ranch itself, following Thomas everywhere and learning the business with the same intensity Sophia had brought to her photography. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly exploring the hills and creek, bringing home everything from interesting rocks to injured animals that needed care. In 1891, Dorothy passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. Sophia mourned the woman who had given her refuge and support when she needed it most, who had believed in her love for Thomas even when it seemed improbable. They buried Dorothy in the Angels Camp Cemetery, and Sophia visited the grave weekly with fresh wildflowers, telling her aunt about the children and the ranch, and all the ways the future continued to unfold. Beatrice remained a regular presence in their lives, visiting from San Francisco several times a year with her own growing family. The cousins became close friends, and the two sisters found that distance had strengthened rather than weakened their bond. As the century drew toward its close, Thomas and Sophia found themselves entering middle age with grace and gratitude. The ranch was established and successful, requiring less of their constant attention. Sophia's photography had evolved from a business into an artistic legacy, with her work now held in collections throughout California. Their children were thriving, each finding their own path while remaining close to the family center. On a warm afternoon in August 1895, Thomas and Sophia returned to the spot by the creek where they had first met, now 17 years in the past. The place looked much the same, though the cottonwoods were taller and the creek bank had shifted slightly with time and weather. They sat on the flat rock that had been Sophia's favorite sketching spot, and she pulled out a worn sketchbook he recognized. "I brought something," she said, opening to a page she had marked. "The original future drawing. I thought we should compare it to reality." They studied the sketch together, noting where the vision had matched and where life had exceeded imagination. The house was indeed larger than drawn, the photography studio exactly where she had placed it. But there were additions she could never have anticipated. The community of families living on the ranch, the cooperative that had transformed the entire valley's economy, the 4 children who had filled their home with noise and love. "You drew us together," Thomas said, pointing to the couple in the sketch. "That was the most important part, and you got it exactly right." "We got it right," Sophia corrected. "I drew the dream, but we built it together." Thomas took her hand, studying the face he had loved for nearly 2 decades. There were lines now that had not been there when they met, strands of silver in her blonde hair, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had found her sketching by this creek. More beautiful, perhaps, because now he knew the strength and depth of spirit that lay beneath the surface. "If you could draw our future again, what would it look like?" he asked. Sophia considered the question, her eyes distant as she visualized. "I would draw us older, surrounded by grandchildren. I would draw Jonathan's buildings changing city skylines and Claire running this ranch with her own family. I would draw the twins discovering whatever it is they are meant to discover. And I would draw us still together, still walking to the ridge on Sunday evenings, still finding reasons to love each other anew." "Then that is what we will build," Thomas said firmly. "Our second future as carefully constructed as the first. You make it sound simple. With you, it is simple. Difficult sometimes, but simple. We choose each other every day and we work toward common goals. That is the foundation of everything we have built." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the creek's eternal song, remembering and imagining in equal measure. The sun moved lower in the sky, painting everything in golden light, and Sophia thought about how this place had changed her life so completely. One afternoon, one chance encounter, one impulsive request from a stranger who saw something in her worth pursuing. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For what?" "For finding me here, for having the courage to ask for something impossible, for believing in a future we could barely imagine." Thomas smiled and pulled her close. "I should thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a rancher who interrupted your sketching, for drawing us a future, and then helping me build it into something real." As the sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and amber, they made their way back to the ranch hand in hand, just as they had done countless times before. The house came into view over the final rise, lights glowing in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney where Rosa was preparing supper. The sounds of children playing drifted on the breeze, and the lowing of cattle provided a familiar backdrop. "This is my favorite view," Sophia said, pausing to take it all in. "Coming home to this, knowing it is ours, that we built it together, I never tire of it. Nor do I, though I confess the view I prefer is sitting right beside me." Sophia laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "After all these years, you are still a terrible flirt, Thomas Reardon. Only with my wife, only ever with you." They continued down the slope toward home, toward the life they had created from dreams and determination. Behind them, the creek continued its endless journey toward the valley, just as it had on the day they met, just as it would for years to come. A constant witness to the love story that had begun on its banks. In the years that followed, Sophia's second vision proved as prescient as the first. Grandchildren did indeed arrive, beginning with Jonathan's son in 1898, and followed by a steady stream of babies that brought new life and energy to the ranch. Claire married Miguel and Rosa's grandson in 1900, cementing the bonds between the families that had worked the land together for decades. And she did indeed take over more of the ranch's daily management, as Thomas gradually stepped back. The twins, true to their adventurous natures, both went into fields that took them away from Angel's camp, but never from the family. Samuel became a surveyor, mapping California's remaining wilderness, while Matthew studied veterinary medicine in Sacramento and returned to establish a practice serving the county's ranchers and farmers. Thomas and Sophia grew old together with the same partnership that had defined their marriage from the beginning. They continued their Sunday evening walks to the ridge well into their 60s, though the climb became more challenging with each passing year. They weathered personal losses and celebrated triumphs, always turning to each other first for comfort or joy. In 1910, Sophia published a book of her photographs documenting the transformation of California from frontier to modern state, a work that would be recognized as a significant historical record, as well as artistic achievement. Thomas was by her side at the book's launch in San Francisco, proud beyond measure of his wife's accomplishments and legacy. They celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary in 1914, surrounded by children, grandchildren, friends, and the community they had helped build. The ranch now covered twice the acreage it had when Thomas inherited it, and the cooperative had evolved into a formal association that influenced agricultural policy throughout the region. Sophia's photography studio was run by one of her former students, but still bore her name and standards. On a clear evening in late May, after the anniversary celebration had wound down and the guests had departed, Thomas and Sophia made one final climb to the ridge. It took longer than it once had, and they had to stop twice to rest, but they persevered, driven by decades of habit and the knowledge that their time for such climbs was growing short. At the top, they stood together as they had so many times before, looking out over the valley as the sun set. The view had changed over the years: more buildings, more cultivated land, roads where there had once been only trails but the essential character remained. This was still a place of beauty and possibility, still a land where dreams could take root and flourish. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" Thomas asked, his arm around Sophia's waist. "I remember everything about those early days, how terrified I was of feeling too much, too quickly, how you somehow made it safe to hope again." "I was terrified too," Thomas admitted. "Terrified that I had imagined the connection between us, that you would realize I was just a simple rancher with big dreams and little to offer. You offered everything that mattered: partnership, respect, love. You offered a future worth wanting." They watched the sun sink below the mountains, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. In the valley below, lights began to glow in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, the daily rhythms of life continuing as they always had and always would. "If we could go back," Sophia said softly, "back to that afternoon by the creek, would you change anything?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "Not a single moment. Every joy, every challenge, every decision brought us here to this exact place. I would not trade any of it." "Neither would I. We have been blessed, Thomas, more than blessed." "We built a life," he corrected gently. "We worked for this. The blessing was finding each other, but everything else we earned through choice and effort and commitment." Sophia leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Thomas Reardon, just as much now as the day I married you, more perhaps because now I know the full measure of the man I chose. And I love you, Sophia. You made my life meaningful. You took my simple dreams and helped me build something greater than I had imagined possible. You are the best decision I ever made." They stood together until the stars began to emerge, holding each other against the gathering darkness, secure in the knowledge that they had created something lasting. A legacy not just of land and business, but of love and family and community. Of dreams sketched by a river and made real through courage and commitment. When they finally made their way back down to the house, moving slowly in the twilight, their grandchildren rushed out to greet them, full of questions and energy. Sophia smiled and answered them patiently while Thomas watched, his heart full to overflowing. This was what the future sketch had promised, what that bold request so many years ago had set in motion. Not just a ranch or a business or even a family, but a continuation, a ripple effect of love and purpose that would extend far beyond their own lives. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, Sophia reached for Thomas's hand. "Tell me," she said, "what do you see when you imagine the future now?" "I see our children carrying forward what we built, adding their own dreams to the foundation we laid. I see our grandchildren growing up with the same values we tried to instill. I see this ranch continuing to be a place where families can thrive and build good lives. And I see us, remembered not for what we owned but for how we loved. That is a good future, Sophia said contentedly. A very good future indeed. They fell asleep hand in hand, as they had done for 35 years, secure in the life they had created, and the love that had sustained them through every season. Outside, the creek continued its eternal journey past the ranch, past the spot where a cowboy had once found a woman sketching and had the courage to ask her to draw their future. The water flowed on, carrying with it the story of two people who had dared to imagine what might be, and then had the persistence and love to make it real.